Hello, my name is Oscar Fire, and I literally just finished reading this like 10 seconds ago, because I only had a couple of chapters left to go, and I wasn't going to take this to work only to read 2 chapters and be done with it. So, yeah, hi, hello, my name is Oscar Fire, and today we are talking about the voyage of the Gerald Shannara, Ilse. Ooh, that reflection, ooh, that is bad. And this is the first book I own that actually has the original publishing cover on it, because the other 8 books I've read so far have not. This is the first one though with its original publishing cover with the and the airship on the back and everything, and yeah. All right, so let's get on it. Let's get on with it. And as I said, I'm really gonna like I said, because I'm only reviewing the book individually, I'm gonna review the series later. I'll of course get into it later, but first things first. So I really enjoyed this. I actually found this to be a super engaging read. I was shocked, honestly, because I remember really liking the Voyage of the Gerald Shannara when I was a kid, but I almost remember no details from it. Though I remember a lot of the names. A lot of the names are still stuck in my head. And every time I read one, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that name. Oh, I remember that name. I remember that name. I remember that name. And it kept happening too. It was just like, wow, I know all these names, even though I don't remember their exact context. But I really enjoyed this, and it makes me think that going into like the next like 4 series, this series, High Druid, Roared and Void, and Genesis, I feel like I'm really kind of entering like peak Terry Brooks, where Terry Brooks was at his best, where he was writing his best works, his best books. Of course, not reading quite in publishing order, but you get the idea. These are the best things Terry Brooks wrote. And I'm honestly kind of glad for it. This is just like a really engaging read. I think because it was just so different. It was such a different read compared to the previous ones, which were like classic magical fantasy adventures. This one's about new technology and going off on a long voyage and a long adventure, and it's a wonderful change of pace compared to what we've gotten before. I'm not even sure how to put it into words. Because there's some things I want to say that I want to really save for the capstone video. The capstone video for the Voyage of the Gerald Shannara. But I guess one of the first things that kind of comes to mind though is that. So I'm like about a third of the way through the book, and the third of the way through the book is when we get introduced to Beck Rowe Omsford and Quentin Leah, right? And I must admit, at that point in the book, I'm like, I'm a third of the way through the book already, and we haven't gotten to the adventure yet, right? And I remember actively thinking that, and then I thought immediately after, wait, why am I complaining? This is actually awesome, and it is. The book spends a very long time, almost halfway through, actually probably a little over halfway through. A little over halfway through. About a little over halfway through the book, where, because this part of the book, compared to this part of the book, this is all set up. This is where the adventure begins. For some reason, my book is actually perfectly goes straight to page 264, But that is the divide though between like the book where the build up to the journey begins and the journey actually begins. And I feel like that is such a good writing decision. I feel like that was such a smart writing decision because it allows us to, because bear in mind, I think this book has like the largest cast of like named and characterized characters in the entire saga. You have everything, you have everyone from Beck, you'll have the Ilse /Grayanne, you have Walker, you have Art Partronell, Panax, Truls Rock, Quentin, Aaron Elesidil. You have tons and tons of characters. Of course, Rue Meridian, her brother, whose name I forgot because he hasn't really shown up in the narrative in a little while. But how did I forget Big Red's actual name? Crap. Oops. Anyway, but oops. Anyway, but you have all these characters, and Terry Brooks, even though not all of them get the same amount of spotlight, he gives a moment to each of them where you get to just get a little bit of a sense of who these characters are and what they're about and what their motivation for coming along might be and so forth. And you know, and it all just works really, really well. It's a really good way to build up the story. And also establishing airships. I'll have a lot more to say about airships. I've already said it in previous videos, but I think I might expound a little bit upon it in the capstone video, probably. But also just like establishing airships and what airships are like, and you know how airships even work. There's like even like light descriptions of how they work on a technological level. Which I think is really smart and really good, and it works well because of course airships are a vast fundamental change to the rules of the world of Shannara. You know, they're a very dramatic change to Shannara, and it's very important really to sorry, I'm trying to think how I want to say this. It's just very important for like the reader to like grasp that yes, we are in a whole new paradigm. We are not sailing with ships. We are not walking on foot. We are sailing through the skies. And I think that taking all that time to build that up was really good. Now, that being said, I did have a few complaints that I probably wouldn't have had when I was a kid. But I have them now because I noticed them now. So the first thing, the war on the Precandorans. So they've been fighting for like 20 years in the Precandoran Heights against the Federation, right? The Freeborn and the Elves and the Dwarves and all that. They've been fighting against the Federation for the past 20 years in the Precandoran. And I thought that was hilarious because it doesn't make sense. Terry Brooks has a good grasp of like tactics and so forth in battles, but overall strategy he has almost no grasp of. Because here he gives like this sort of vague implication that it's sort of like a World War I style, like trench warfare, you know, just ongoing warfare for 2 decades. And I'm just like, that's not how medieval warfare would work. Battles in medieval wars were too pitched and populations frankly too small to really create like set battle lines like that, you know? Armies had to be mobile. They couldn't just bog down like that. They wouldn't bog down like that. It wasn't something that would happen. That sort of thing, that even siege warfare only lasted a couple of months, you know, like sieges only lasted like 3 or 4 months most of the time. Like say the siege of Vienna, right? That only lasted, what was that, only like 4 months or so? And by that point, like the attacking Muslims were like very badly depleted. Their supplies were starting to run low. Their numbers were kind of worn down. You know, they were getting worn down. And then, you know, the great Allied army arrives, you know, led by the Polish, you know, and destroys them basically. You know, but prior to, you know, in medieval warfare, there wasn't medieval/Renaissance warfare. There wasn't like the only thing that was prolonged was like a siege. But actual field combat, that didn't last that long. You didn't have those kinds of things happening, except here apparently. But it doesn't. But like I said, it doesn't make sense. You know, the first time you see like prolonged siege warfare is like the American Civil War, where it's like the American Civil War. Also, like you have like certain things like blockades and so forth, where you might have like ships, you know, trying to bombard forts on the coast or whatever, where that might last a while. But the American Civil War is the first time you really see major siege warfare in St. Petersburg, Virginia. Wait, is it St. Petersburg or just Petersburg, Virginia? I can't remember. I get that mixed up. Or, you know, but, you know, Ulysses S. Grant besieged the city for several months. I think it was like 6 months. No. When did he start the siege? Did he start this? I think he started siege in, was it September or October? It was like a 6 or 8 month siege, something like that, in that ballpark. And that's like the first like particularly long siege you see. And then in World War I, of course, it's years of trench warfare with very little movement. But the reason trench warfare occurs is because improvements in technology meant that the attacking side, that attackers, in this case the Central Powers, you know, couldn't break through the defenders because of advances in technology. You know, that's why, because machine guns and airplanes and poison gas and heavy artillery rendered mass infantry attacks obsolete. But here we're talking about medieval warfare with some fantasy air warfare thrown in for good measure. And that's not the same thing. The war should have resolved years earlier. You know, there's no way you get like a super long, prolonged war that doesn't devolve into like a guerrilla war for one side. And I just think it's kind of silly reading that. I really do. Because yeah, it just doesn't make sense at all. Another thing, very major retcon. So in the Elfstones of Shannara, it is never explicitly stated, but is heavily implied that the Elcris that dies in that book is the original Elcris, the first Elcris that was made to seal away the demons. In this book, however, Terry Brooks explicitly states that the Elcris only lives for about 1,000 years. And I hate that, actually. I hate that retcon, because it doesn't really work. And this is why. So if the Elcris died every 1,000 years, there is no way the elves don't know that it's coming in Elfstones. There's no way they forget. There's no way it just like, oh, well, just sort of slipped our minds. Suddenly there's demons everywhere. Because the thing about it is that the Elcris dying is a very serious event, right? We see it in Elfstones, and we see it in Dark Legacy even, where demons overrun the land. We see demons overrun the land. There's no way the elves are going to let themselves forget that, hey, we got to send this chosen over to the Bloodfire before the Elcris dies. You know, there's no chance they forget about that. I understand it's a millennia, but it's like if every 1,000 years, you know, like an army of bears rose up and mauled people to death, and it happened consistently for every 1,000 years throughout history. So 1,000 years ago, an army of bears rose up and mauled everyone. And every 1,000 years before that, an army of bears rose up and mauled everyone. And 1,000 years before that, bears rose up and mauled everyone. We would have historical records of that. The elves would have historical records of that. You know, it's not like elven civilization was destroyed with the Great Wars too. You know, there would be some sort of recollection that the Elcris died and demons came out, and they would make some sort of failsafe to not forget this. And it just creates this weird plot hole that has really dumb implications actually for the rest of the story. Because it kind of implies the elves are idiots if they don't record, hey, in about 1,000 years, guys, remember that the Elcris is going to die and you should be prepared for that. You know, I just don't... It's a very silly change, and I don't think it should have been a change. I think it was a very, very dumb change, in fact. Because like I said, in the Elfstones, it's never explicitly stated, but it's very heavily implied that the Elcris is... Because it delves into the Elcris' memories a little bit, and it's very heavily implied the Elcris remembers the original sealing away of the demons. And I think that's such a bad idea. I think it's such a bad idea to just change that like that. I also have an issue with the Sword of Shannara, because in this, Terry Brooks seems to suddenly change the powers of the Sword of Shannara, because the sword, of course, is used by Beck to guide the Jurl Shannara, the ship, through the Squirm, which is the ice pillars that are being used to protect the valley that this old world facility is located in. What this facility is precisely isn't very clear. I don't think it ever is made very clear. It seems like it's an old military base of some sort, possibly. You know, but the sword is used to guide them, and that doesn't make sense, really. That's not a power the sword has ever had before. You know, and it doesn't line up with any previous power we've seen the sword have. In fact, the sword has only ever had one power: to reveal the truth. And I mean, you could kind of logic out like, yeah, well, finding the truth maybe includes finding paths, but no, it's kind of a stretch. It's a really big stretch for the Sword of Shannara to be the solution to getting through this obstacle. Like I said, it feels like Terry Brooks just invented a power for the sword out of whole cloth, and it doesn't work very well. But okay, so maybe I was gonna say I think that's the majority of the complaints I have, because these are things I would not have noticed when I was a kid, but I do now as an adult. But there is one other issue, and I think more of this is because I already know what's gonna happen. But it feels to me, just reading the book, it feels to me like Terry Brooks telegraphed the revelation that Beck is actually an Omsford, not a Roe, and the revelation that Brienne is a sister, and everything. I feel like he telegraphed that way too hard. I feel like he wasn't subtle enough about it. I don't know how he does it otherwise. I think maybe that's kind of an unavoidable thing. But I just felt like it being like a big secret. I mean, it works in the story. It's just the way he writes it. It feels like he's kind of like trying too hard to like surprise us, shock us. He's trying to shock us with the revelation that Beck is an Omsford, and it's just like, it comes across a little cheesy, a little cheap. Doesn't really work. I mean, again, that might be just because I know the whole story in advance, more or less. But at the same time, could have been better written. But that said, all those complaints aside, because some of them are kind of technical, others are, I think, actually very important storytelling issues, but I really liked this book. I really, really enjoyed this book. It was very engaging. It was very exciting. The search for the keys was exciting, and the mystery around them was interesting. The mystery around, okay, who left these keys here? Who made the map? Like there's something up here. There's something suspicious going on here. And, and trying to, and working through it was really, really cool. And the cliffhanger. The cliffhanger at the end of this book, really good. With the company broken up, the ship the ship adrift, the company broken off, and half of them murdered by laser beams. That's just, yeah, it's, and then Beck encountering, the Ilse witch, his sister, at the very, very end, I just think was very splendidly well done. And I'm very excited to read Anthrax and Morgarwer, I think you pronounce it. So anyway, all right, I'm done for now, done rambling. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, looking at my thoughts as I read this book. If you did, leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe, check out my Twitch channel, stuff like that. And I will catch you in a few weeks, probably I would bet 3, given how exciting the book's getting. For probably 3, maybe a little longer, because I'm not the fastest reader on the planet. For my review of The Voyage of Gerald Shannara Anthrax. Until next time, everybody.